okay? Okay, so let's do a little bit of practice. First, we're going to look at some of the worksheets that I'm sending you, okay? So just 1 second. Let's start with first off, don't forget that I've sent you this packet. It's the number power packet. This is what it looks like in the front. Goes through coordinate grid, putting points on the grid, graphing a line, finding the slope of a line, some practice. Brings you here to graphing a linear equation, okay? Which is directly what we're working on today. So if we take a look at this first problem, it's on page 7 of 16. Says graph each equation. As a first step, complete the table of values, then find the x and the y intercepts and slope for each graphed line. And so we're going to talk about that a little bit, but let's first start with the equation, which is here. Okay, y is equal to x minus 2. So why don't you write that down somewhere, and then take a look at their table of values here. Okay, that's their in-out table. They have already picked the x for you, and they want you to solve for y. So why don't you pause the screen and go ahead and take your equation here in your table, write that out, and then you're going to solve for y 3 times. The first time you're going to solve for y when x is 0. Then you're going to solve for y when x is 2. And finally, you're going to solve for y when x is 5. Okay? So do that and then come back. Okay, so hopefully you were able to do that. If not, just kind of follow along here. Again, this was the linear equation. And what we know is x is going to be whatever, y is going to be whatever x is minus 2. Okay? Y is always going to be whatever x is minus 2. So to start to come up with some examples, this first page, they give us numbers for x. Other worksheets, you're going to have to come up with your own x, your own number, and then solve for y, okay? Remember, you can pick any number you want for x, because what we're looking at is what's the relationship between those two variables, okay? So start with the first one, take 0 and put it in for x. So y will equal 0 minus 2. 0 minus 2 is negative 2. So when x is 0, y is negative 2. All right, same thing. We're going to put a 2 in for x. Y is equal to 2 minus 2, which is 0. So when x is 2, y is 0. And finally, one more, 5. Y is equal to 5 minus 2. 5 minus 2 is 3. Okay? And so now I suggest when you're trying to graph a line from a linear equation, 3 points. You need 3 points. 2 will always line up. 3 will not. You have to do them correctly to get them to line up. So here's your 3 points. Okay, so if you go back to your worksheet, put those in the graph. If you need to make your own graph, go ahead and do that. That's what I'm going to do. And then we'll see if it makes a straight line. Okay, so welcome back. What I've done is I've drawn a coordinate grid here. Kind of went out 5 in all directions. And, you know, I'm just eyeballing it. I don't have graph paper to put this on. I'm trying to show you. So doesn't have to be perfect. But put these points on. 0 on the x, negative 2 on the y is this point. 2 on the x, 0 on the y would be here. and then over 5 up 3 would be here. And so what we can see is it makes this particular line, okay? And so now we're being asked to find the x-intercept, the y-intercept, and the slope, okay? So you should be able to find the slope, whether it's from the table or from the graph. That was our last video, so you should know how to do that. Maybe you can go ahead and try that yourself. I will go over it here in just a second. But there's a couple terms that we need to talk about, and that is the x-intercept and the y-intercept. I believe we touched on these in earlier videos, but I just want to be clear what they are. So the intercept means where the line crosses either the x or the y, okay? So the x-intercept would be the point that a line crosses the x. Remember, this is the x. So this point here would be the x-intercept, which is 2, 0. The y-intercept is where does the line cross the y-axis, okay? And so that would be this point here. The y-axis would be 0, -2. Okay? So the last thing is find the slope. In the last video, we talked about how to find slope on a graph as well as a table. And so in a graph, what we're going to do is we're going to find 2 points and make a slope triangle. So we've got a rise and a run. A rise and a run. And so here's our kind of our triangle, and we need to count those from point to point. So the rise is 1, 2, 3, and the run is 1, 2, 3. So the slope would be 3 over 3, which simplifies to a 1. Now, is this a positive slope or a negative slope? You should have said it's a positive slope. And how do we know? Because the line is increasing from left to right. It is increasing, it's going up, which is positive, okay? So it has a slope of +1. Quickly from the table, if we want to find slope from the table, we just pick 2 points and run it through the formula, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So I don't want to mess with the negatives. I'm going to pick these two. 3 minus 0 over 5 minus 2. Still equals 3 over 3, which simplifies to a +1. Okay? So that was that first one. Let's go back. Okay, and you can kind of see where the line would be there. No, it won't let me make a line. Anyway, moving on. So that was number 1. I think you can probably work through each of these 2, 3, 4, and draw the line. And actually, once you know this, you can apply this, I think, to about the rest of the pages. Graphing circumference, temperature, systems of equations. I mean, you could probably figure those things out. I'm not going to go into all of them today because right now we're just focused on what a linear equation is and how to see that relationship on a graph or in a table. All right. So let's try another one. Let's try number 3 here. And notice it says choose your own values for x. So go ahead and pause the screen. And what I want you to do is I want you to try number 3, fill in the table, find the x-intercept, the y-intercept, the slope, draw it on the graph. Okay, I'm going to do all that myself. And then when I come back, it should be completed. Okay, so go ahead and pause your screen. All right, so let's go back to this particular problem. What number is this? This is number 3. on page 107. I picked this one because it's got more than one step in the equation itself. You also have to pick your own values for x. And so I wanted to just go over this one quickly and show you how I would probably do that. So here's mine. I've already picked my x's, and I picked those strategically. Okay, our graph is only so big, and so our points need to fit on the graph. And so since this is a -2, and then I'm subtracting 4, which maybe you realize when you picked some values that it's going to pretty easily go off the grid, especially if you pick positive numbers. So one thing that I usually tell my students is when you're trying to pick a value for x, you want to make it as easy on yourself as possible. So don't pick huge numbers or complicated numbers. A great one to start with is 0. Good ones are also 1 and -1 because those are really easy to work with. So take a look at what happens when I pick 0. Okay, so I'm going to put 0 into this equation for x. So -2 times 0 minus 4. -2 times 0 is 0 minus 4 equals -4. So when x is 0, y is -4. Same thing, except instead of 0, x is -1. Put a -1 in for x. -2 times -1 is a +2 minus 4 equals -2. So when x is -1, y is -2. Finally, my last value for x I picked was -2. Put a -2 in for x. Work it out. -2 times -2 is +4 minus 4 is 0. Now I have 3 coordinates. The x and y's go together, and we can take those and put them on our graph. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Be right back. Okay, so here's my line. Again, I'm just estimating here. It's not perfect. My grid's not perfectly drawn, but this is the general look of what your line should look like, okay? So 0, -4 is this point. -1, -2 would be this point, and then finally -2, 0 is this point. Notice the line that it makes, okay? So what I want you to try now is look at the line, decide what you think the slope is. You can either find the slope from the line or from the table. I'm going to show you both ways. Find the x-intercept, the y-intercept, and finally what your simplified slope is, okay? So pause your screen if you haven't already done that. Give it a try, then come back. Okay, so let's go over, first off, let's use the graph and find our x-intercept. So the x-intercept is what is x when where does the line cross the x, okay? And so we find the line, remember this is our x-axis, crosses at this point. So we need to name this point. This point is -2 on the x, but 0 on the y. Okay, 0 on the y, but -2 on the x. Likewise, we want to see where the line crosses the y-intercept would be this point. And this point is 1, 2, 3, -4 on the y. So 0 on the x and -4 on the y. Finally, our slope, we can use either the table or the line. And so we need to make our slope triangles, which is up or down and then over from point to point. And so what we can see is this rise is 2 and the run is 1. Okay, so rise 2, run 1. Simplified, 2 divided by 1 is 2. So the slope is 2, and now we need to look at the direction of that line. would you say this is an increasing line or a decreasing line? Is it a positive slope or a negative slope? And what you may notice is this is dropping from left to right. It's dropping. And so that's actually a negative slope. Slope is -2. Okay. And lastly, let's look at how we're going to get that slope from the table. Maybe we don't have a graph. So from the table, we're going to use our formula. y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Let's just pick the first two. So y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. -2 plus 4 is 2 over -1 minus 0 is -1. 2 divided by -1 equals -2. So same slope, just different ways of finding it from the table, and the last one was from the graph. Okay, so you might need to be strategic when you're picking your x and y's, or when you're picking your x's. If you have to graph them, they need to fit on your graph. So just keep that in mind.